If you or I made an archaeological discovery, we'd step back and say, wow. It's not the sort of thing we expect to happen to us. Unless you're an archaeologist, in which case, hello and welcome. Even if you were an archaeologist, though, there would still be occasions when you'd have to step back from a discovery and say, whoa. They're the discoveries that leave archaeologists mystified. And they're right here in this video. Why was a child buried in Siberia with a pot on his head during the 16th century? That's a question that's been bothering archaeologists ever since the discovery was made in October 2020. The boy went to his eternal rest with his entire head covered by a copper cauldron. He was only around 7 years old at the time of his death, and was also buried with a single copper wire earring decorated with a glass bead. He was also given a small iron knife, which was clasped in his hand. The knife might have been a symbolic way of arming the child for the afterlife, but the cauldron is unlike anything archaeologists have ever seen before. It's almost comically oversized, to the point where its handle was poked into his belt. The grave was found close to Lake Bolshoy Polosky, which is in the north of Siberia. Archaeologists aren't even able to say which culture the child came from. They've never seen a burial like this before, so they have nothing to compare it to. We'd have to find another burial to compare it to before we could start coming up with theories. Speaking of unusual burials, let's check out a mummy wrapped in such an unusual style that it's been nicknamed Mummy a la mode. The wrappings on its face have been arranged in an intricate pattern of squares. This style of wrapping would have taken a very long time and hasn't been seen on any other mummy. That implies that the person inside the wrapping must have been someone special and unique. But who are they? X-rays have revealed that the mummy, which is currently in the Louvre in France, belongs to an adult male who passed away around 2,300 years ago. Inscriptions on the wrappings and other items he was buried with indicate that his name might have been Ninu or Pakari. His face mask, which was once placed atop the unusual wrapping, is elaborately decorated with winged scarabs, which are symbols of rebirth. The amount of trouble that people went to when burying this man means he must have been wealthy. However, history doesn't record anybody of note by the names Ninu or Pakari. Are the records incomplete, or was he simply a rich but inconsequential man? The Omphalos of Delphi was once thought to be the center of the world. That's a belief held by the ancient Greeks, who, unsurprisingly, believed that the center of the world just so happened to be the center of Greece. There are dozens of myths and legends about this ancient stone. One of the most entertaining stories is that the great god Zeus threw the stone into the air to find out where the middle of the world was, and when it landed in Delphi, he decided to leave it in situ. Even the name Omphalos translates into English as Earth's navel. You'll now find it in the Delphi Archaeological Museum, which was built around it. What's uncertain, though, is whether this is the original Omphalos of Delphi or a replacement. When the Greek writer Pausanias visited the Omphalos of Delphi in the 2nd century, he wrote of it being covered in a woolen cloth and adorned with a pair of gilded gold eagles. There's no sign that anything was ever attached to the stone in the museum. It's possible that Pausanias was either lying or exaggerating, but we'll never have any way of knowing for certain. We've seen one unusual burial in Siberia already, but let's go back there for another. This one comes from the village of Ust-Ivanovka in Primorsky Krai. Archaeologists have named this set of human remains, which was found in 2017, the Dancing Skeleton. The nickname comes from the unusual crossed-over arrangement of the skeleton's limbs. Its hands are on its pelvis, its feet are crossed, and its knees are far apart. Like the boy with the cauldron on his head, this is a burial practice that's never been seen in any other burial before or since. The skeleton is that of a male who died at around the age of 30, somewhere between the 7th and 9th centuries. He was no more than 4 feet and 9 inches tall. His stunted height might have given him an unusual posture, which could explain his position when buried. However, that wouldn't explain why he was buried bound. The rope he was bound with has long since rotted away, but if his legs hadn't been tied when he was buried, they'd eventually have relaxed into a more natural position. His hands were probably tied too. To top off the mystery, he was buried in a grave full of white sand that was brought here from somewhere else. We're left with a lot of questions and very few answers. Most people, when they hear the name William Wallace, think of Mel Gibson in the movie Braveheart. That's unfortunate because Gibson's William Wallace is a hugely historically inaccurate portrayal of a genuine Scottish hero. Wallace fought for Scottish independence, and fought hard. He might even have done so using this sword, which is claimed by some as the blade wielded by Wallace at both the Battle of Falkirk and the Battle of Stirling during the late 13th century. If this was truly his sword, though, Wallace must have been a giant. It's almost 5.5 feet in length from hilt to tip. Tests have indicated that the sword, along with the belt and hilt that come with it, were manufactured during the 15th century. It's undoubtedly an old sword, but it seems impossible for it to have been the Scottish freedom fighters. On the other hand, experts have analyzed the blade and concluded that it's made of several swords joined together by hammer welding. It might once have been Wallace's sword, but it could have been altered, repaired, and added to after his execution. Yet again, we simply have no way of knowing. We've all heard the expression loaded dice before. It's a dice that's been altered using a combination of weights and magnets to favor falling on a certain side, thus improving the chances of a certain result. Carrying loaded dice is the kind of thing that would get you thrown out of a Las Vegas casino, but it's not a new way of cheating. In April 2018, archaeologists confirmed the discovery of a 600-year-old loaded wooden dice in Norway. This dice isn't loaded using any clever methods, though. Instead, it has 2 5s and 2 4s, but lacks any 2s or 1s. Anyone looking closely at the dice would spot the ruse almost immediately. Gambling was a popular pastime in Bergen during the medieval era, but was eventually banned by the authorities in 1276 because of the trouble it caused. Some of that trouble might have been down to people cheating using dice like this one. It ended up buried beneath the remains of a wooden street in an area that's known to have been full of inns and gambling dens in the 13th century. Archaeologists have speculated that it was deliberately discarded by its cheating owner when their fellow players began to grow suspicious of their relentless wins. Can we go to Siberia 3 times in one video? Sure, why not? This is the Pazrik carpet, which was found in yet another Siberian tomb in 1949. It looks a little ragged around the edges, but it's of a style that you'd recognize and still see in stores today. That's why people are always amazed to discover that the carpet is 2,600 years old. Rugs, carpets, and mats almost never survive for such a long time, but this one was buried in special circumstances. It was inside the tomb of a Scythian prince, and at some point in the distant past, tomb raiders broke in and robbed the prince of his grave goods. In doing so, they left a gap in the tomb that allowed the elements in, and everything within the tomb, including the Pazrik carpet, was frozen solid. Presumably, the tomb raiders didn't see enough value in the carpet to steal it when they stole everything else. The carpet is a reminder of how long traditions like this have been around for, and also how little some things have changed in over 2,000 years, even as everything else changes around them. The oldest Dutch work of art in the world very nearly spent the rest of planet Earth's existence stuck at the bottom of the North Sea on the edge of the continental shelf. Instead, through nothing more than a happy accident, it was snagged in the nets of a fishing boat in early 2018. The work of art in question is a bison bone, covered in delicately carved zigzag patterns. Scientists have tested the bone and concluded that it's 13,500 years old. Archaeologists have attributed the work to an Ice Age hunter-gatherer, who would once have seen this part of the world as a rich hunting ground before the North Sea got in the way. There's some debate over whether the patterns have any meaning or whether they're simply decorative. Zigzag patterns are among the earliest created by our ancestors tens of thousands of years ago, and can be found all over the world. It's been speculated that the pattern might be a reference to water, which is almost always depicted as either zigzags or a serpentine pattern in ancient cave art. Was this hunter trying to communicate something about the water to his friends? Or was he just etching the pattern because he liked it? In 2016, a man from Dorchester, England, finally got around to taking a close look at some objects he'd inherited from his grandfather decades earlier. He'd looked at them when he first received them, but thought most of them were worthless, so he put them all in cupboards and rarely thought of them again. Little did he know he was missing out on an incredible find. When he eventually took this delicate Hellenistic crown to be valued by professionals, he was told that it could be worth 7 figures or more. The astonished man, who wishes to remain anonymous, says he has no idea where his grandfather could have got it from. It's an authentic Greek myrtle wreath, and it's approximately 2,300 years old. The artifact is handmade and made from pure gold. The ancient Greeks are known to have worn wreaths like this on special occasions, perhaps when receiving prizes after competing in athletics. But there are very few surviving examples in the world today. The professional valuers even found traces of old dirt in the wreath, suggesting that it might have been buried with somebody. Unsurprisingly, the shocked grandson decided to cash in on his inheritance. In a similar vein, here's a 3,500-year-old ceremonial dagger that, until late 2014, suffered the indignity of being used as a doorstop. It's a type of Bronze Age dagger known as a dirk, and it's one of only 6 surviving examples known to exist in Europe. This is another ancient treasure that was overlooked in England. A landowner, probably a farmer, dug the dagger up in the early 2000s in East Rudham, Norfolk. He thought nothing of it and nearly threw it out, but ultimately decided that it would be useful for holding doors open. The bend in the dagger isn't an act of vandalism. It was bent deliberately while it was being made, which suggests that the blade had a ceremonial purpose rather than a practical one. Other than the bend, it's so similar to the other dirks that have been found elsewhere in Europe that some experts believe that they were all made in the same workshop. Unfortunately, they have no idea where this workshop might have been. Upon realizing the dirk's value, the landowner sold the blade to the Norfolk and Norwich Archaeological Society for a sum equivalent to around $70,000. You might think you know fashion, but we don't think you can make that claim until you've seen the world's rarest textile. This little number is made from the silk of more than 1 million spiders. This is thought to be the largest piece of cloth ever made from the produce of golden silk orb weaver spiders, and was exhibited to the world for the first time in 2009. The creation of the piece was a collaborative effort between British art historian Simon Pearse and his American business partner Nicholas Godley. It took them 5 years and approximately $400,000 to finish the garment. Pearse was inspired by the tale of a French Jesuit missionary attempting to do something similar without success in the 19th century. Pearse and Godley had the advantage of a machine that could extract silk from 24 spiders simultaneously without harming the spiders. All of the spiders were returned to the wild once their work was done. The resultant garment is strong, light, thin, and flexible. If it were easier to produce the base material, the fabric would have a variety of uses. As for what this garment is doing in this video, well, we never promised you that all of our amazing finds would be ancient. If you want something ancient, let's talk about the Nampa figurine. It was found in 1889 in Nampa, Idaho, USA, as workers dug out a well. Their steam pump hit a seam of clay at a depth of around 300 feet and started spitting the clay out in clumps. The Nampa figurine came out during this process of ejection. It's about the size of a dime, but has an easily identifiable humanoid shape. It has 2 arms, 2 legs, a trunk, an identifiable mouth, and 2 eyes. The markings on its chest might be designed to symbolize clothing. The big problem with the figurine's existence is that the layer of clay it was found within is part of the Glens Ferry Formation and is supposed to be 2 million years old. Clearly, a humanoid figurine can't have been around 2 million years old. There weren't any humanoids around to make it. One of 2 things has to be true here. Either the Glens Ferry Formation isn't really 2 million years old, or we're not the first humanoid creatures to live on Earth. Scientists insist that they have the age of the clay layer correct, but refuse to accept that the Nampa figurine is genuine. They can't have it both ways. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!